a palm-sized clay tablet, cracked lower left corner from a Penn Museum steel drawer. Nippur provenance. Filed as domestic animal omen, minor fragment. The gloved finger came away with pale clay dust. The cat appeared between a pig and a dog. One verb did not describe a sign. It described a delivery. Why would a routine omen record use the grammar of divine assignment? A second document uses the same word. There are approximately 30,000 tablets in that collection. Most of them do not ask for a second look. Most of them do exactly what their labels promise. They list, they record, they organize. Trees stayed with trees. Stones stayed with stones. Animals stayed with animals. The series was built to be thorough and, in a certain sense, deliberately unremarkable. The kind of text that survives for 4,000 years because nobody thinks to steal a vocabulary list. That is what made the one wrong verb so difficult to ignore. The series in question is called Summa Alu, if a city is set on a height, one of the oldest and largest omen collections in Mesopotamian history. More than 100 tablets dealing with every kind of sign the ancient world believed the gods might leave in ordinary life. A dog howling at dawn, a scorpion near the hearth, a pig in the road. Each entry follows the same structure. If this happens, then this follows. The language is conditional, passive. The creature acts, the human observes, and the omen moves outward from that moment like a signal passing through still water. That is how it works. For every animal in the series, that is how it works. Except, according to one disputed reading, for the cat. Tablet 45 covers 92 lines of feline behavior: jumping, defecating near the doorway, sitting on a person's belongings, staring at empty space. Ordinary observations, filtered through the belief that the gods were always communicating and that the animals sharing a household were among the instruments they used. The mainstream reading is clear. This is observational divination. The cat is a sign bearer. Its behavior tells the household what is coming. To mainstream scholars, this is religion, not instruction, not assignment. The cat is a medium, not an agent. But one cluster of lines in that tablet uses a different kind of verb. Not, if the cat does this, then the household should expect that. Something closer to, the cat has completed an action, and the action has a destination. The verb form appears elsewhere in Mesopotamian texts, not in omen series, but in administrative records, temple inventory confirmations, messenger receipt logs, the kind of language used when a servant delivers an item and a record is kept that the item arrived at its intended place. Not a sign, a delivery. You know how one wrong word can change the meaning of an entire message. Not because it is a dramatic word, because it is an administrative word in a place where it has no business being. The pig entry in the same tablet does not use that verb. The dog entry does not use it. Every other animal in Shuma'alu follows the conditional passive structure that defines the entire corpus. The cat cluster in this one section does not. The official explanation is simple and defensible, a scribal variant. A copyist's habit carried over from a different genre, an error in transmission that no one corrected. That explanation is possible. It satisfies the shape of the problem. It does not explain the second word. In the same cluster, attached to the cat's movement, there is a locative suffix, not where the cat was, but where the cat was going. And the destination it implies is the threshold. In Sumerian, the threshold was not simply an architectural feature. It was called the between place, the point where the interior world of the household touched whatever lay beyond the visible. It was where Apkallu figurines were buried beneath floors to protect the house. It was where Lamassu engravings were pressed into clay tablets and sealed under the foundations of entrances. These were the designated guardians of the seam between the living world and the divine one. And in the anomalous cat cluster of Shuma'alu, the cat's movement ends at exactly that location. A cat in an omen list should produce a sign. This cat appears to complete one. There is a word for what the cat seems to be doing in that entry. It is not haunting. It is not warning. It is the word administrative scribes used when a delivery had been made and was waiting for acknowledgement. That was the detail that stopped a junior philologist working a residue backlog at the Penn Museum from moving on to the next drawer. She was cross-referencing the Shuma Alu cat entries against a second real text, the Har equal Hubalu series, a massive Babylonian lexical encyclopedia running nearly 10,000 words across 24 tablets, the kind of reference work used to train scribes, the kind of text that organized the known world into columns, where everything was supposed to stay in its assigned place. The cat in Har equal Hubalu does not stay in its assigned place. In a collection that carefully separates domestic animals from wild ones, the cat appears in a position that does not match its zoological classification. It sits adjacent to a cluster of animals that, in other ritual texts, appear in the context of threshold protection. Not wild predators, not grain store hunters, animals associated in other documents with the function of guarding a boundary. The philologist noted this in her working file. And then she noticed something else. A previous cataloger had left a pencil annotation on the archival sleeve of the related fragment. Positional anomaly, it read. See companion drawer, N series. The N series drawer contains fragments separated from their source tablets at intake, standard archival practice during the early decades of the Penn collection. She looked for the companion fragments referenced by the note. They are listed in the digital inventory. They have no physical location in the current database. Their status reads, location unverified. This is not evidence of suppression. Archives are large. Fragments get separated. Catalog notes go unfollowed for decades in collections of 30,000 objects. But the note exists. The drawer it points to has not been found. And according to the same pencil annotation, those missing fragments contain continuation lines from the cat section with what the cataloger described as a variant translation. That is how archives hide dangerous things. Not by locking them away, by making them look boring, then misfiling the next page. What those continuation lines might say depends on what the visible lines are actually describing. An independent researcher, working outside the major institutional framework but with legitimate philological training, proposed that the cat cluster in Shuma Alu is not recording behavioral omens at all. It is recording behavioral protocols. The difference is direction. An omen moves outward. The cat acts. The human reads the sign. The information flows from animal to observer. A protocol moves in a cycle. The cat acts. The action has a target, the target receives something, and the delivery is noted. According to this reading, the word used to describe what the cat brings to the threshold is related to a linguistic root that appears in other Mesopotamian texts in the context of divine inspection, not divine punishment, not divine reward. Specifically, inspection, the act of a higher authority examining a lower space and receiving a report on its condition. Mainstream scholars reject this reading as category confusion. The researcher's answer was that the confusion may be the point. On its own, this could be an elaborate misreading. One unusual verb cluster in one damaged tablet does not rewrite the history of anything. The official explanation holds. The scribal variant holds. The translation artifact holds, and then the second document appeared, not from Nippur, not from the same century, a fragment provisionally associated with or Eridu, classified as a ritual purity text, the kind of document dealing with the correct procedures for maintaining a household at the boundary between the clean and the unclean. In this fragment, in its description of the cat's role during threshold cleansing rituals, the same anomalous verb cluster appears. Same delivery and receipt structure, same destination suffix, same word, different city, different genre, written perhaps 2 centuries apart. On its own, the first tablet could be a scribal quirk, the second is something else. The real question is not why the structure appears twice. It is what it reveals about where cats were understood to belong and why the ancient world cared so much about that specific location. Because the threshold was not a peripheral concern in Mesopotamian cosmology, it was a primary one. The lamassu, those colossal winged guardian figures with human heads and animal bodies, were placed in pairs at the entrances of cities, palace gates, and throne rooms. Smaller versions were pressed into clay tablets and buried under house thresholds to extend protection to ordinary households. The Apkallu, antediluvian sage beings created by the god Enki before the flood, were placed as figurines at doorways and in the corners of rooms. Both classes of being are described in texts as stationed at the border between the mortal world and whatever stands beyond it. Both were assigned, both were stationed, and in the omen texts, the cat is always at the threshold, not sometimes. The doorway and the threshold are where the cat's behavior is most frequently recorded, most carefully described, most insistently returned to across all 92 lines. If you have ever watched a house cat position itself at the exact center of a dark doorway and stare at something that is not there, you already know this is not random behavior. The ancient world noticed, and it did not call it random. Now the story leaves the tablet room. This is the part that changes the scale. In 2004, French archaeologist Jean-Denis Vigne and his team published findings from the Neolithic site of Chilorokambos in southern Cyprus. They had found a burial. It dated to approximately 7500 BCE. A human, one of the highest status individuals in the settlement, based on the richness of the grave goods, polished stone axes, ochre, finely worked flint, and 40 centimeters away, less than the length of a human arm, a complete cat skeleton, 8 months old. No signs of butchering, no evidence the animal had been used for food or sacrifice. Just a cat, buried beside a human, placed carefully at the edge of that person's grave space and oriented toward the threshold of the burial. Here is the problem. Cats are not native to Cyprus. There were no wild cats on that island. For a cat to exist at Chilorokambos in 7500 BCE, someone had to make a decision. They had to catch the animal on the mainland, carry it across open water, and bring it specifically to this settlement. That is not an accident of migration. That is a choice. And when the person beside whom it was buried died, someone decided the cat belonged in the grave too, placed at the edge, oriented toward the threshold. The mainstream interpretation is warm and reasonable, early evidence of the human-cat bond, companionship, the emotional beginning of what would become domestication. And that reading does not contradict anything in the burial. The evidence supports it. But this burial predates Sumerian writing by approximately 4,500 years. It predates Shuma-Alu by roughly 6,000 years. And the cat is already in the threshold position, beside the highest status human in the settlement, placed at the boundary of the afterlife space with what looks, from this distance, like care. The Sumerian scribes did not invent this relationship. They inherited it, and whoever gave it to them left no other records. Some alternative researchers argue that the arrangement did not begin as pest control, the standard account, but as something more deliberate, something structured enough that its original purpose survived inside later texts in the form of verb choices and positional records that no longer made complete sense to the scribes copying them. That the 92 lines of Shuma-Alu Tablet 45 are not original compositions, but inherited documentation of an older practice that someone thought important enough to preserve even after the reason for it had been obscured. According to this view, the cat was not assigned to the threshold because Mesopotamian religion valued thresholds. The cat was there first. The mythology followed. Mainstream archaeology does not support this as a proven sequence of transmission, but the question it raises is not whether it has been proven. The question is why the same arrangement keeps returning. Egypt holds a version of this story too. Bastet, the cat-headed goddess, was the guardian of the household, protector of the threshold between the living and the dead. In the Book of the Dead, a cat is described as stationed at the base of the Ished tree, the world tree, the cosmic boundary between the ordered world and the chaos pressing in from outside. In Mesopotamian texts, that cosmic boundary is where the Apkallu were stationed before the flood. The same animal, the same position, the same function. In cultures that mainstream archaeology does not place in direct contact, and across a cultural and geographic distance that the standard account of convergent evolution has to work to explain. The metaphor is not vague. It is specific enough that alternative researchers find it difficult to dismiss as coincidence. And mainstream scholars who dismiss it as convergent symbolism are not wrong to do so. They are following the evidence as it stands. But the specificity of the position keeps them answering the same question across different fields. And then a researcher returned to the N-series catalog note. She requested access to the companion fragments. The digital inventory confirmed their existence. The physical collection could not confirm their location. Standard institutional response. Fragments from early 20th century excavations were sometimes separated during wartime collections management, loaned to other institutions without full documentation, or miscatalogued during large-scale reorganizations. The Penn collection is vast. Objects get lost. The reason does not require a conspiracy. But the pencil note described those fragments as containing continuation lines from the cat section variant translation. If the visible lines describe a delivery to the threshold, the continuation lines would describe the receiving party, what or who receives what the cat brings to the boundary. Mainstream scholars would read that as ritual personification, a poetic invocation of divine attention, common throughout Mesopotamian religious texts. The alternative reading does not require the recipient to be a metaphor. No one had to hide the fragment, they only had to stop looking for it. And for approximately 90 years, no one looked. Modern imaging changed what is legible in old clay. Projects like the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, combined with more recent machine learning translation tools, have revealed marks beneath damaged surfaces that earlier visual inspection missed entirely. A researcher working with enhanced scanning on a Nippur tablet within what appears to be a copied omen series found something beneath a hairline crack, a sign, partially obscured by damage to the clay, invisible in standard light. When the subsurface imaging resolved it, the sign appeared to be a determinative, a classification mark. In Sumerian writing, determinatives are placed immediately before a word to identify its category. This particular determinative appears in Sumerian texts before words belonging to divine beings and their assigned functions. It does not appear before any other animal entry visible in the same section. It appears before the word for cat. In the line describing the threshold position, the reading is contested. The mark could be a scribal error, a smear in the clay from a tool, or a shadow artifact in the scan. The imaging is new, the analysis is preliminary. Mainstream scholars would require extensive peer review before accepting any subsurface reading as textually significant, and they would be right to require it. That is how evidence works. But if the mark is what the enhancement suggests, then the tablet does not say, if a cat sits at the threshold, read it as an omen. It says something closer to, the assigned one sits at the threshold, and the assignment continues. The original tablet is still in the steel drawer. The accession label still reads Domestic Animal Omen Series, Minor Fragment, Nippur Provenance. Nothing about it has changed in decades. The clay is the same pale ochre it was when it came out of the ground. The crack in the lower left corner is the same. The verb cluster is still pressed into the surface in the same configuration, still using language that does not behave like the rest of the series, still pointing toward the threshold, still sounding less like prophecy and more like a task record waiting for someone to confirm receipt. It is like finding a family photograph where every person is looking at the camera except one. You can stare at that photograph for years. The person looking away is not doing anything unusual. They are just looking at something no one else in the frame can see, and you cannot stop wondering what it was. Cats are the most observed animals in human history. We have recorded more footage of them than of any other creature on Earth. They sit in doorways, they stare down dark hallways, they position themselves at the threshold of a room and will not move and look at something that is not there, at something in the space between here and whatever comes next. This behavior was documented in 92 lines by Mesopotamian scribes who treated it seriously enough to preserve across multiple copies. The people who placed apkallu at doorways and buried lamassu tablets under thresholds, watching for the same thing, something passing through the boundary, something at the edge of the visible. And before any of them wrote a word about it, someone on the mainland decided a cat needed to cross open water to Cyprus, to be buried beside the highest status person in a Neolithic settlement, positioned at the edge of their grave with its body oriented toward the threshold. The official explanation says the Sumerians were reading omens in animal behavior the way people read clouds for weather signs, that the cat was a medium, not an agent, that everything in those 92 lines is religion, ancient, elaborate, and complete in its own terms. That explanation may still be correct. It accounts for most of the evidence, and it is held by serious scholars with serious reasons for holding it. But it does not explain why the verb in the cat cluster does not match any other verb in the series. It does not explain why the same structure appears in a ritual text from a different city in a different century. It does not explain why the same animal appears in the same threshold position in Egyptian cosmology, in Mesopotamian guardian texts, and in a Neolithic burial from an island that had no cats before someone brought one there. And it does not explain what the missing fragment was going to say about who receives what the cat delivers. The pattern keeps appearing. The fragment that would complete the entry is still listed as location unverified. The verb is still pressed into the clay. The threshold is still where it always was, and whatever the ancient world understood about what happens there, whatever it was careful enough to record and inherit and carry across water and preserve in the grammar of an administrative delivery, it has not stopped being relevant simply because the record is incomplete. The label says minor fragment, the clay says something else, and whatever it says has been waiting in that drawer for 4,000 years for someone to finish reading it.